From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to the show. No Sooks, no Lefties tonight. Pauline Hanson, Matt Canavan and Nigel Farage. But as you know, because you live it every single day, we talk about it every single night, the reality of Albonomics. This is where the federal budget position seems to get better by the day, but the reality of the people who pay the taxes in this country gets worse by the hour. Now, as you know, most of the people who talk about politics for a living, they live inside the bubble of the yes voting ACT. There are also people who are in no danger of seeing their jobs disappear anytime soon, and most likely they can whinge their way to the local union or their boss to get a pay rise. But the reality for most Australians is that they don't get much out of the system, but their job is to shut up and pay for it. Again, the way that our politicians talk about our economy is in this sort of hands-off way. When the Prime Minister and the Treasurer go thumbing through the budget papers, they give themselves a pat on the back for this or a pat on the back for that. But the reality is that all they truly care about is being able to say surplus equals good, deficit equals bad. And while, as a rule, that's a good thing because you don't want a whole string of surpluses because every year's deficit gets added to the last, and you end up with $1 trillion worth of debt. The reality is that the self-congratulations that the politicians give themselves for how well the economy is doing is a complete other world to the one that you are living in. Now, the reality is, while the budget may be in surplus, you are going backwards. Why? Cost of living. It was the number one issue going into the May 2022 election. It has been so every week since. But of course, all of the things that were the reason to change the government in May of 2022 are now amplified by November 2023, including the value of the Australian dollar. The value of the Australian dollar is now down by a substantial amount of money. Before the current Prime Minister was there, it was about 74 US cents, and now it's about 64 US cents. So a full 10-cent reduction means that everything that we import into the country costs more. It also means that everything we export from the country, we're able to make more profit from, and of course, because the taxes get connected to all of that, the budget deficit seems to disappear. So get the point here that the overall, overarching, everything is awesome, except for the individual. Now, inflation in this country has been out of control for a long time. Now, we can all freely admit that as you look from the left to the right, that the bad times of the 80s and 90s have only been rivalled with the most recent spikes in inflation. And while inflation is ever so slightly down on where it was, it's still back to where the bad times were in the 1980s and 90s. As we tell you on this program every night, because we're able to find the data to prove what you already know, it's too much. And it's going up again in the past 2 months, which means today was inevitable. It was inevitable today that the Reserve Bank would meet and the Reserve Bank would increase interest rates because inflation was starting to head back up in the wrong direction.
Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock today delivered her first interest rate rise.
The RBA today hiked official rates by 1/4%.
It's the news households and businesses across the country had been expecting but dreading all the same. A 13th interest rate rise.
The day started in celebrations. But it quickly turned sour. The bets came in. Rate hike 13 was inevitable.
Now, you notice here that the media is all very clever in talking about rate hike 13 because they're trying to pretend that it's all the same thing. But of course, we know that there was, after the first rate hike, a change in government, meaning that it has only ever gone up or stayed level, never gone down, on the watch of the two people who pat themselves on the back because the budget's looking good and they feel your pain. But now that we have the Albo dozen of interest rate rises, it's now important to have a look at the difference since this bloke became Prime Minister. The reality, if you are paying off a house, is that you know you are paying more. But have a look at how much people are paying when it comes to more. The average home loan in Australia is somewhere between $500,000 and $700,000. So overall, you are paying more than $1,100 a month, or $1,800 a month, or $2,500 a month if it's a $1 million loan. But think about it this way. If I had told you that in May of 2022, when people were making their decisions about who you wanted to be in charge of the economy, would you have voted for the people who lead to you having to pay an extra $13,500 a year on your mortgage? Or the people who have sat back and let inflation get out of control, do nothing about cost of living, so you're paying an extra almost $22,000 a year? That's on top of what you're already paying. And for the people in the major cities, it's almost $30,000. That's the reality. That the Albo dozen has done the damage, has broken the back of Australians. How is anyone supposed to find $30,000, $13,000 or $21,000? Now, of course, we all cut back, but then we find new ways to cut back, and for some families, they're starting to cut into the bone. Mark my words, people are going to have to sell their house. And while that may well be fantastic for the nearly 1.5 million migrants that will end up here because there'll be a new place to go, people will be pushed into a rental market that currently can't serve any more people. Remember, there was a place that was up for grabs in Ipswich recently. It wasn't a flash joint. It was a normal place for rent in Ipswich. But for every place that is currently for rent in Ipswich, more than 120 people turn up to have a look at it. Let alone the queues around the bend in southeast Queensland, Sydney, Melbourne and much of the regions as well. Now, there is a person who is in charge of the Australian economy who wants all of the props when he delivers a budget surplus, but accepts none of the responsibility when you suffer as a result of the way they are managing our economy. He's the man who said this when it was just one interest rate rise.
This is a full-blown cost of living crisis on Scott Morrison's watch. When things are going well in the economy, he takes all of the credit. And when times are tough in the economy, he takes none of the responsibility.
And surprise, surprise, the man who criticised a former government for taking all the credit but none of the blame is doing exactly the same after a dozen interest rate rises since he took over the economy.
They take these decisions independently. They can explain those decisions, and I refer you to the statement for the explanation of what's happened today.
You see, he thought that it was all the previous Reserve Bank governor's fault. So that's why they spun and blamed, but spent and offered very little to change people's lives when it came to cost of living. So they got what they wanted. They didn't reappoint him. They used his deputy and assumed that she would do the right thing and not create a political problem for the government and not raise interest rates. But then inflation went up for the past 2 months, which meant that interest rate rises had to take place. Amazingly, there are just as many articles in the smart press tonight about the relationship, or lack thereof, between the Reserve Bank and the government as opposed to the people who get screwed over, like those that are now having to spend, and I repeat again, $13,500 extra on your mortgage every year, $21,000 or $29,000. And again, there is one thing that I have spoken about many, many times that this government could do to offer a little bit of relief. Now, they say that they are spending the best part of $26 billion, and that has reduced inflation by 0.5%. Well, the reality is that we're now at about 5.5%. So, okay. But there's something that is a major driver of inflation that would cost far less than $26 billion a year to do something about. It would create zero inflationary pressure. Instead, it would provide relief. And you know I'm going to talk about petrol. Because petrol, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, went from about $1.20 in September of 2020, and now we're sitting anywhere between $2 and $2.10. You notice the spikes? When we start to change the government, it goes up and up and up and continues to do so. In fact, in the past month alone, the inflation that you are paying on petrol is 19.7%. The previous month, it was about 15%. Petrol is included in what's called the basket of goods, the thing that they look at to decide how Australia is going when it comes to inflation. Power prices are also in there, as are tobacco. Now, amazingly, the federal government has decided to increase taxes, therefore how much you have to pay for tobacco, and we'll slowly see that become part of the inflation issue. Power prices continue to go through the roof, not because of the war in Ukraine, but because we're spending literally T4 trillions of dollars transitioning from one electricity system to another, and throw on top of that petrol, where the government rakes out about $6 billion a year in taxes from petrol. Now, tomorrow they could reduce that taxation by 25 cents per litre for 6 months. It would cost $3 billion. That's it. If they wanted to make it 50 cents for 6 months, obviously $6 billion. If they wanted to keep 25 cents off your petrol from tomorrow for 12 months, again, $6 billion. And they wouldn't have to go deeper into deficit. They wouldn't have to borrow a cent. You see, this government has got a $20 billion surplus, which means they are deliberately choosing not to reduce this tax that could tomorrow help save your family budget, help save a small business, help save distribution chains as everything is moved around the country. Now, Jim Chalmers actually said today that he can read the numbers just like we can, and that petrol is part of the inflation problem.
The primary driver of inflation in the most recent data was petrol.
The other bit that he misses, of course, is, as I said, power prices, which is more than 18%. So it's petrol first, power prices second, and they are the two big drivers. But of course, green energy, we can't criticise that. Now, today, an opinion poll came out. Other hosts have made reference to it and got on them for doing so. But what about this part of the detail from Newspoll? 81% of Australians say they want the fuel tax cut. They know what we say on this show is true, and hopefully the message is spreading by you spreading this on social media. But when asked about it today, would he use part of his $20 billion surplus to cut your petrol, to push down inflation, to save Australian families? What do you reckon the answer was?
We're not currently working up any proposals on the fuel excise. We are focused on rolling out $23 billion of cost of living help.
The bloke who gets driven around in a limousine, who has the position to choose how much you pay for petrol, is simply saying to you, let them eat cake, because I don't want to sacrifice how I look politically when it comes to a budget surplus. And of course, nobody, when they ever get near him, asks questions about cutting the taxes, but I think that call's going to get louder. Mark my words, we have been right the whole way along. Now, there's a very personal story that I want to tell you here that's not one that's going to be full of rack and ruin. It's not going to curdle your blood, and it's not going to make you feel like this is the poorest person in Australia. But I want to introduce you to a bloke who is well and truly being affected like many suburban people are when it comes to inflation. You see, we've already shown you that Albonomics is currently seeing the government banking $20 billion in surplus, but people are lined up around the block for food. We've shown you that people all over the country are struggling with power prices to the extent where people are not taking showers, not turning on air conditioners. These are the people who are being deeply affected by government policy decisions, but because the people who are in charge of what you get to read and see and what we talk about and what the political conversation is, well, of course, these people mostly vote Green or live in a teal seat, live in the ACT, and they're unaffected. They can take all this in their stride. But there are plenty of people like Jules who are exactly who I think of when we frame this program every day and when we talk about this issue every night. Jules is a 45-year-old bloke who spoke to the Financial Review today, and he is a removalist. He says that, put simply, life is work, sleep, repeat. Being a small business person, the only way he gets a pay rise is to get up earlier, go to bed later and work an extra day if he has a day off at all. I want you to hear his circumstances. Jules Evans doesn't have much time for anything other than working and looking after his kids. The 45-year-old removalist and father of three has to work more than 60 hours a week. Remember, public servants wouldn't even work 40. Politicians even less, to meet his mortgage repayments, which have risen from $2,700 to $3,500 per month since the Reserve Bank started lifting the interest rates. And then there's the fuel costs for his business, the orthodontics bills for his kids. It's pretty much work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep. His business, by the way, free plug, is Truck of the Irish. He also has no emergency savings and almost no room to further cut his spending should his repayments keep rising, which of course they have today. He said he's already down to 100% outfits from Kmart and is a regular user of vouchers and discount apps to bring down other costs. He quit smoking years ago, he quit drinking years ago, he doesn't have any extra personal costs. I'm just a money-making and kid-carrying machine at the moment. Now, blokes like him are average Australia. People who are not the beneficiaries of an endless world of welfare handouts. 35% of the federal budget is spent on welfare handouts. Yet the Treasurer, who has an extra $20 billion, is saying that he will not cut fuel by 25 cents a litre. That would help this bloke's life. It would help his business. It would help his kids. But no interest. Instead, the Prime Minister and his useless Treasurer just say cost of living, and somehow that's meant to be comfort for a bloke who literally is doing back-breaking work to pay for a roof for his kids.
Addressing that cost of living challenge, which is our number one priority.
Help with the cost of living is our number one priority.
The highest priority of the Albanese Labor government is rolling out this cost of living relief.
We continue to have as our number one priority cost of living relief.
Seriously, ring your local MP. Ring your local MP and demand they cut your petrol taxes by 25 cents a litre. And every time you drive past one, look at that and say, thanks, Albo. Thanks, Grim Jim, because that's the reality of the economy that we're living right now. Airbus Albo, of course, is about to leave China. It's about to make its way towards yet another international meeting before going back to yet another international meeting after that. All up, 20 trips since he became Prime Minister. Of course, in China, he got the whole red square welcome. Well, I should say the red carpet welcome in Tiananmen Square. There we go. In Beijing. Because, of course, Australia is out from the cold. What about the overhype rubbish the Australian media has been trying to feed you while you have had trouble feeding your kids?
One of the most important meetings of his prime ministership, sitting down with the Chinese president in Beijing.
Operation China Reboot, his most important diplomatic mission yet.
Anthony Albanese is just 2 hours away from a critical face-to-face meeting with the Chinese president.
The Prime Minister is in Shanghai for a historic official visit.
Historic, critical, most important thing of his prime ministership, while literally people queue for food in Australia. You would think actually turning up to his office and focusing on that would be the most important thing of his prime ministership. Oh, no, but the media was in tow and they know. Never complain about these things. Write down what the PM wants you to hear and you'll get invited on the next one. Hey, we're meeting the ambassador for drinks at 7. Well, as you know, the Prime Minister had his audience with Xi Jinping and then on this program last night delivered one of the most bizarre press conferences you have ever seen an Australian leader deliver. Now, nothing came out of this meeting. No solid announcement, no promise about tariffs being removed, no promise that Australians in jails over there will go, no promises that the hacking will stop. Instead, a promise that you get to meet the Deputy president, the premier, every year for the next 5 years. But have a listen to this bloke trying to live up to his own hype. This is how he talked up that pointless conversation.
We spoke about the importance of continuing to have dialogue, and it was a constructive discussion. We recognised that that was the beginning of a discussion between us, and it was a very much a discussion. We even had a bit of a debate about wine and the quality, and he certainly agreed that Australian wine is good. He spoke about the Tasmanian devils as being cute animals in Australia. They're probably not as cute as pandas. And I relayed the discussion I think we had at a press conference yesterday about pandas. He reminded us of the fact that not all pandas are cute by relaying the Kung Fu Panda story as well.
Honestly. So this bloke who had a meeting that produced nothing as part of his 20th trip overseas, while 3.7 million Australians can't feed their families, while petrol is something he could fix tomorrow but won't, let alone every other problem that we've talked about on this show. So how did the media react to nothing? Well, of course they want to stay on the gravy train, don't they? They want to join him on the Airbus.
Well, warm and productive and friendly, according to the Prime Minister, Ange, the first meeting at a leadership level of this significance for 7 years.
China is turning a new cheek towards Australia.
In the Great Hall of the People, a great display for one person.
Oh, and another little thing. This wasn't as special a meeting as you may well think. He had world leaders yesterday lined up like planes arriving at Hong Kong airport. You see, as well as our Prime Minister yesterday, he met Serbia's Prime Minister. He also met the Cuban Prime Minister, and he met South Africa's Deputy President. Now, many of those countries, of course, have their hand out to China when it comes to paying for infrastructure in their countries. China does this because those countries, particularly in the South Pacific and Africa, don't have the capacity to pay it back, which means China ends up owning you. What a way to take over the world without firing a shot. Now, of course, Australia does not have that situation. Thankfully, the Belt and Road Initiative that Daniel Andrews wanted to sign up to has been torn up. But essentially, we're in exactly the same position. So China will either buy you off by buying you out or buy you off by saying that they'll buy things from you. Either way, China wins. And our media clapped it on. One of the things that I have got more reaction to than anything else in the time that we've been talking together has been the disgraceful decision of this Prime Minister when it comes to investigating COVID. The failures of state and federal government when it came to what happened in 2020 and 2021. Of course, none of that got mentioned in China, did it? Oh no, we were talking about pandas and Tasmanian devils. Oh, a historic meeting. Now, the Prime Minister promised that he would have a proper inquiry into the failures of decision-making that broke so many hearts and businesses and our country.
We will also have to, I think, have a look at some of the way in which we've dealt with the pandemic. It's inevitable there'll be some form of an inquiry there in our handling so that it can make recommendations going forward.
Well, of course, they did announce one, but it was not a real inquiry. 2 of the 3 people were pro-lockdown. 1 of the 3 people who will be investigating this, all behind closed doors, by the way, is a former Labor Party staffer who have deleted their tweets of their opinion of the then Morrison government in relation to COVID. Geez, I wonder why. But today we learnt that apparently they are ever so slightly changing what this COVID inquiry is going to be. Oh, no, it still won't look at state governments. Oh, no, there's no major change there. Instead, supposedly they're going to start to talk about lockdowns, about What was the logic behind them? Of course, there will be no state-specific information. But amazingly today, while this announcement was being made on Melbourne Cup Day so they could say that they had amended it, but hopefully no one was watching because the Prime Minister was making history or everyone was pissed while watching the races, guess what still remains not part of this inquiry? People being able to give evidence in public like they have demanded from a Royal Commission. These are the people who were not able to see the people who were dying. They are not able to tell the stories of those who died alone. They, of course, remain unheard, unseen, unwanted by this Prime Minister, including my mate Mark. Mark Jessup worked with us here at Sky News for a long time. He now runs the Channel 9 Canberra Bureau, and he wrote an opinion piece about the experience of not being able to see his dad and his dad being alone for such a long time during the pandemic. I know in my heart that he would have had a better chance of surviving if his body, heart and mind weren't suffering from being alone. I'm not out to blame anyone, and no one was prepared for a pandemic. This is where Mark's very reasonable. But the outcome of the pandemic should be a priority for this government, not just an inquiry. I truly believe that each Prime Minister elected is there to do the best for the country, no matter which party is in government. I do not agree with everything they say, but I do trust the decisions they make are because they believe it's in the best interest of the country. Sadly, after this inquiry, isn't looking into matters like Mark's dad, he no longer believes it. Now, you know how critical I am, relentlessly critical of this bad government. But I'm going to say something I have never said before, but I will say it with every fibre of my being. Shame on this Prime Minister. Shame on his Health Minister. To pretend that you are widening the scope of an inquiry that still is not going to look into state government, that is still not going to give the opportunity to every family who had a family member die alone, is a disgrace. You know it, I know it, but even more importantly, not just the people watching, but the people who lived it, lived through it and are heartbroken forever by it, will never, ever forget it. And may they never forgive you for trying to ignore them. As I say, no sooks, no lefties tonight. We'll get into all of that in a moment with Matt Canavan, Pauline Hanson, Nigel Farage. Just getting started, and you can see I'm in one of those moods tonight, so no one's safe, and I've got the steel caps on. Glad you're watching. Welcome back, no sooks, no lefties, both from Queensland, but in Canberra, because Senate is sitting right now. The wonderful Pauline Hanson, Matt Canavan, lovely to see you both. So, Pauline, we know that rates have gone up again, that slow squeeze. I think it's important to look about it, not just about weekly or monthly, but how much extra people are going to have to pay every year on top of where they were a couple of years ago. And then the arrogance of the Treasurer that he acknowledges petrol is part of the problem when it comes to inflation, but won't try to cut the tax by 25 cents that would help everyone, and he's got $20 billion extra in the surplus.
Well, he's got $20 billion extra in the surplus. Remember, there was $50 million also, and $50 billion in the surplus from the previous government that they didn't even know about, and they've got the surplus again from the coal and our iron ore exports and agriculture as well. Paul, this government has spent $188 billion since they've taken over government. That's extra spending they've put on, nearly $200 billion extra spending that they have spent on people. Look, when Morrison took off the tax on the petrol, that was because I pushed for it. I actually pushed that the government had to take the tax off. I called for a year. Morrison made it 6 months. There has to be some relief to the people out there. The cost of living is killing them. But, Paul, I think the main thing is the cost of electricity. That is more important to the people, because cost of this electricity, you can't keep subsidising electricity. It's due to government policy, the climate change policies, the transmission lines, everything that they're bringing in, the renewables. It is costing us. That's where the cost is. If you bring down the cost of electricity, that will actually mean the supermarkets won't be charged as much because the cost of refrigeration, everything is based around the cost of electricity. So I know the fuel, they're calling about fuel, but I'm telling you, it has to be electricity. Go and build some more coal-fired power stations, which I've been calling for years. build the coal-fired power stations, give us dispatchable power, cheap power. They admitted we can't meet net zero. We cannot get to 83% emissions free. It is just bloody bunkum. It's bloody lies they're telling the Australian people. Hydrogen won't work. It's never worked anywhere in the world. This is another load of bloody bunkum that they're feeding the Australian people, and they're lapping it up because you don't understand. The only way the Australian people is going to really understand this, Paul, is they've got to keep hurting in the hip pocket to realise, stop voting for these bloody idiots and putting you through the hurt and pain that you're going through at the moment. Remember, the 12th interest rise is under this government, and because of their extra spending is creating inflation. Look at the government for all the problems that you are feeling today.
Well, again, when we talked about petrol, that was what, about 19 and a bit percent. Electricity, 1 month alone, the last month that's just been, Matt, it was an 18% increase. The average is what, 5.4%. Again, you don't have to be sort of the Bush economist here. It's just, again, we've always said that the issue with Labor's endless march from, Rudd to Gillard to Shorten to Albanese to move from one electricity system to another was the cost of that transition. We are paying it. It's trillions of dollars. It is part of the inflation mix, and you not only pay for it through your bills, you're now paying for it when it comes to your home loan.
Exactly right, Paul. I mean, you see it every time your power bill turns up. We've been installing renewable energy at a record rate. Solar and wind have been going up in this country. These factories right across our prime agricultural land has been going up at a record rate, more than anywhere else in the world. And every time you get a power bill, your costs go up. They go up and up and up and further. I noticed today that back in May last year, just before the election, Anthony Albanese tweeted out that Australians are suffering under a triple whammy of higher grocery costs, higher interest rates and higher power prices. And he said he's got a plan. The government, the Australian people deserve a plan from someone who knows how to tackle this stuff. Well, we're nearly 2 years in now. 2 years into an Albanese government, and he hasn't delivered on the promises he made at the last election, including cutting your power bills by $275. He said that nearly 100 times before the election. Hasn't since, completely ignored it since. And he's completely failing now to deal with any of these crises. I just wanted to add something about your proposal on the petrol levy, the fuel levy. Normally I wouldn't agree with that because I'd want to see the money go into roads. But the other thing you might have noticed, Paul, in the last few days is that the government has announced that they're going to cut back on infrastructure spending. Well, that's about to happen. They're about to drop that and say they're not going to spend as much money on roads. Well, if they're not going to spend as much money on roads, why are we paying nearly 40 cents a litre at the petrol browser to them? If they're not going to spend the money on the roads, give us the money back.
Well, I agree. But again, my simple point was, OK, you can't turn around and cut a cheque for $1,000 because that is going to be inflationary. This is one of those things that they'd be able to deal with. I agree with Pauline as well about power bills. I'm just talking about an automatic thing they could do tomorrow. But the Treasurer, petrol's a massive part of the inflation. Are you going to cut the cheque? No. It's like just because he wants the gold star going into the next election. Now, guys, you see my passion, and you've heard me talk to you both privately about it, about this disgraceful, I'm not even going to call it the COVID inquiry. It's the COVID cover-up that's coming from this government, where the states are off the hook. And again, they use Melbourne Cup Day to say, we're going to look a little bit at lockdowns, but not really. But again, no people. One of the reasons we wanted that Royal Commission is because we wanted people to be able to say, because of your decisions that you put in place, I couldn't see my dying father. Because of the decisions you put in place, I could not hold the hand of my dying daughter. Those people need to be heard from, because, Matt, remember, one of the reasons we definitely, absolutely had to have a Royal Commission into the Robodebt scandal was because the victims needed to be heard. This was a scheme that had already been shut down, already compensated for, but those victims needed to be heard. What about the victims of the people who literally didn't hold the hands of the people that died?
Well, this was the greatest government intervention outside of wartime in our nation's history, and it's an insult to all those people who suffered throughout the last few years that there's not going to be a proper inquiry into it. I mean, China's, I think, probably conducted a more rigorous review of the origins of coronavirus than we're going to get out of this particular review of the Australian government's decisions during COVID. And we know that because some of the panel members that the Albanese government handpicked themselves have publicly supported in the past the very lockdown policies you're describing and the terrible effects they had. Look, I haven't announced this publicly yet, Paul, but I've been working with the parliamentary legislative drafters here to draft legislation to force a Royal Commission-like inquiry on the government. I can't through the Parliament do a Royal Commission, but we can do a Commission of Inquiry, which has exactly the same powers as a Royal Commission. It's how we got the Banking Royal Commission going. And so I just call on all senators to support that. We can do this. We can push it through the Parliament and give those people a voice. They suffered a lot. Anthony Albanese didn't suffer. None of us suffered down here. We were able to still get paid. Quarantine, was a holiday for most of us here in politics.
Correct.
A lot of people didn't get a holiday. They're the people who continued to have our grocery shelf stocked, staffed our hospitals. They deserve to have their voice heard.
Pauline, I won't get you to commit to something that you've just heard of from Matt. Obviously, you work out behind the scenes here, but that's the sort of thing that Parliament should be doing, right? And surely that's something that we can get all the way from, dare I say, yourself right around to Lydia Thorpe.
I support Matt totally. I got a Senate inquiry up into my private member's bill that I wanted to stop mandating people having the COVID shot to get a job, to work in Australia. What a pathetic inquiry that was. We had Pfizer and Moderna there that they said, they didn't believe people were forced to have the injection. It was led by Labor. It was just an absolute joke, this inquiry. Under the inquiry that Albanese wants to have, under his terms of reference to it, even Lorraine Finlay from the Human Rights Commission said it would be a toothless tiger. There'd be absolutely nothing in it. It's a protection racket for his premiers around the country. Because unless we have a Royal Commission where they have to turn up, they have to give evidence, nothing will ever change in this country. It has been the biggest cover-up of, since the war that's ever happened in this country, and it's disgraceful that they're not doing anything about it. And the people should be screaming from the rooftops. What you've led in there with that journalist and his father and other people that we've heard, that they were denied the rights to even move across the borders to see their loved ones, go to funerals, have a wedding, have anything. They were denied their basic human rights. And it makes me so angry that, people should be saying more about this and doing more about it, because I tell you what, you let them get away with it this time, they'll do it time and time again because they want to control you 100%. And you will not have any rights left in this country.
Well, and again, it's this game where, frankly, a lot of Australians sit back and say, geez, isn't that terrible, but it didn't happen to me. But as soon as it happens to you, it becomes the worst thing in the world. This is the opportunity for us to guarantee it never happens to you. Doesn't happen to your parents, doesn't happen to your kids. The lockdowns, the borders, and the inability for those things to be broken at the worst moment in someone's life is despicable. Every politician involved with it should be, in my view, sort of wiped from the map, and certainly you get the chance to do that in Queensland next year. Tomorrow, there's some expectation there's going to be some pro-Palestine activity around a port in Sydney. They're going to try to stop a ship that's coming in from Israel. Now, Matt, what I find interesting about this is I'm sort of annoyed that people have been tipped off to this, because in New South Wales they did pass a bunch of laws to stop anti-climate or the climate lunatics from interrupting things like ports, and you actually go to jail if you interrupt that sort of infrastructure. So we've, by tipping people off, we've missed an opportunity to maybe scoop a couple of dozen off the streets and see you later for a few weeks.
Well, look, I do hope the law is fully enforced. I note the New South Wales Premier has come out hard against this protest, so I hope that's followed through by New South Wales Police. I suppose the one silver lining here, Paul, is it's time, we know the time to send the coal boats out, get them going tomorrow while this protest is on, because it'll probably be exactly the same people that would have been at the coal blockage protest will be at this so-called Free Hamas or whatever they're about. I mean, the hypocrisy here. I mean, where is the protest stopping the solar panels coming from slave labour in Xinjiang?
Oh, no, we sign deals for those. We cheer them in.
Yeah, exactly. We give subsidies. Your taxes go towards that. I mean, I'm just a bit sick and tired of people using this conflict, using this humanitarian disaster that's occurred over the past month there in the Middle East to pursue their own selfish political proposals here. We had the Greens walk out the Senate. I wish they did that every day. It was much better question time after they left. But this kind of pontificating show pony politics while people are suffering and dying is the lowest form of any type of politics that should stop.
Well, again, let's see what happens here, Pauline, because remember the organisers of the riot out the front of the Opera House, they should have been fined $22,000. They were never fined. You know that, of course, if 1,000 people were marching against any other ethnic minority, well, then obviously they would be gone after as well. Laws have passed about swastikas and all the rest of it, right? It's a test here whether the police go out in force and anyone who turns up to it trying to stop that boat from coming in, they go to jail tomorrow.
Well, Paul, we'll see where Chris Minns is all talk and see if he has some action behind him, because you know what, he's in control of the police force down there, and whether they do anything about it. This would probably be led by Marine Faruqi along beside the unions, CFMEU, that is actually pushing this as well. It tells me, multiculturalism hasn't worked in Australia, because we've got this rubbish that's happening in other countries here on our streets here. It's a very complex issue, but the whole fact is it's over there, it's not here.
Yeah.
When I see the hundreds of thousands of people that are protesting in this country, especially when outside our Opera House they're saying gas the Jews, it is absolutely disgusting. There is nothing you can support here whatsoever. I'm not saying I'd like to see a ceasefire from all sides, sort out their problems. This has been going on for decades, and innocent people are being killed with this. But I cannot stand Hamas, who actually started this, pushing their own ideology and putting innocent people and their own people as fodder. Now, I have, as I've said, if anything happened like that in Australia, we wouldn't put up with it. We would retaliate. And that's what you have to understand here. It is innocent lives at the end of the day, and that's my concern. But you do not bring your problems here to Australia. It is up to our Australian governments and the state government to stop these protests from happening. Take those people, lock them up, and I'm calling on the police. And if not, then the military should get involved. Put an end to this rubbish. We don't need it or want it on our streets in this nation.
Well, and our Home Affairs Minister, who's supposed to be across all of this, she's had more to say about Donald Trump Jr. than she has about the hate preacher in Sydney, but I got more about that in a second. Thank you very much, Senators. Enjoy your time in Canberra. I know how much you love it. And how Queensland is Pauline? Even when she's halfway down New South Wales, she still thinks she's in Queensland, so Sydney's down there in the Opera House. That's a proper Queenslander, all right? Well, no matter where you are, you're still geographically in Queensland. Thank you, guys. All right, Nigel Farage joins us next, and he joins us from London. You will not believe this, but the pro-Hamas crowd are ready to interrupt Remembrance Day in London. Okay, more in a second. Be you a visiting friend in a snug hotel room in Melbourne or at your place right now, I'm glad you're watching Paul Murray Live. Thank you for doing so. The only time you'll see Nigel Farage each and every week on Aussie Telly is right here and right now. He joins us from London. So Donald Trump, he was giving evidence today in the case that's already been decided by a judge to be fraud. This is despite the fact that the bank that loaned him the money didn't make the complaint and he paid back the loans. But the judge was starting to show the obvious bias that we all know is in this case, and that could end up being the grounds of appeal. What did you think today?
Yeah, Judge Engeron's his name. He is highly political. He is assisted by a prosecutor who was elected on a ticket to say they were going to get Donald Trump. And that's exactly what they're doing. And the whole thing's a farce. I mean, Mar-a-Lago has been valued by the judge at $18 million. I've got people will give you a cheque for $500 million on one phone call. And that's the basis of the whole case, is that Trump inflated the level of his properties to get loans from banks, all of which, by the way, have been repaid. No one's been defrauded. What is going on is terrible. But the impact of it is big. You might have seen late on Sunday some polling coming out showing that in the 6 key swing states, Trump is now leading in 5 and leading big in 4 of those 5. In fact, over the last month, his poll numbers have leapt. And that is because fair-minded Americans are saying something is going badly wrong here.
The 11th of November, the Armistice, Remembrance Day as we call it here in Australia, is one of the most sacred days on the calendar. It is where we remember those who fought in the Great War and all that have fought after. Yet the people who want to talk about the war in their part of the world are planning to march on that day. Now, this is after people have already been replacing poppies with Palestinian flags at the cenotaph. That's a disgrace. Are the police really going to let this happen, or can they shut it down early?
Yeah, worse than that, we learned reports this morning that a poppy seller in Edinburgh at a train station last Saturday he had his feet trod on, had he punched in the back. I mean, a 76-year-old veteran, army veteran, being assaulted by the pro-Palestinian mob. They have demonstrated every single London in Saturday, and I've no doubt they'll go on doing so. What they must not be allowed to do is to demonstrate this Saturday, the 11th of November. And we have the power, the police have the power to give the Home Secretary the order that this march should be stopped. Totally silent, by the way, in all of this is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. You're beginning to get the feeling that religion is now playing a very, very big factor in all of this. I want this march stopped. It'd be a disgrace if it goes ahead, but I worry that the people that run my country now are so gutless that they may fail to act.
It's going to be ferocious if they go anywhere near it, because we always know that there is, this metaphorical third rail, anything to do with that. But obviously there's people who want to go back. When we had people holding up signs in this country that had, the Anzacs killed my uncle, knock this off, because this is not going to be tolerated. And if it is, don't tolerate any government that is allowing it to happen. Our Prime Minister goes to China. Our media carry on as if it's the second coming. Of course, he was lining them up like planes in Hong Kong airport, because there was the South Africans, there was the Serbians, there was even the Cubans were also meeting on that particular day. The Prime Minister got nothing out of the meeting apart from we'll have more meetings down the track. And China gets what it wants, which is Australia going from 1% adversarial back to neutral, which means China gets away with whatever they want.
Yeah, the Chinese are playing a very canny diplomatic game. They're playing it all over the world. You see what they've done with the Solomon Islands. They're going to have a naval sort of refitting yard there, which directly threatens Australia. I'd love to know, did Albanese discuss that threat? And if he did, has he let the Australian people know about it, or has he been played for a fool? And I think you guys need to know a lot more about what was said in that meeting.
Well, also, here's the reality, right? 1 hour meeting. They talk for 30, you talk for 30. They translate for 15, you translate for 15. They're talking for half an hour at best. And again, when they say, I raised this and I raised that, that's when they just read the screen at the start when the cameras aren't there. But by his own admission, the Prime Minister says, we're talking about pandas and Tasmanian devils and whether your wine's better than Iowa. That's not a serious conversation with a country that continues to hack Australia, let alone the rest of the Western world. Nigel, great to see you. You can see we're a little peppery tonight, and that's the way we like it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
He's a good man. Nigel Farage. See him on GB News, which is up on the Flash app, flashnews.com.au, on YouTube as well. Quick break, back with more. And the running of the drunks was in Melbourne today. I'll show you the footage next. Yeah, there was a horse race, but also at Flemington today was the running of the drunks. Here it was on A Current Affair.
They started drinking at 8 o'clock this morning. What time will you finish?
Oh, well, 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Have you had a beer yet?
Yeah, I've had a few.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
We're having Furphy's Crisp and Bullet Bourbon today.
A beer and a bourbon?
A beer and a bourbon. Takes you about 40 minutes to get it, so I think you should stock up, mate.
Okay. This is a massive queue. What's it for?
The bar, I hope.
Now, of course, before Media Watch complains and already an investigation will begin and I will, of course, be removed from television, it was a joke, Joyce. But also a reminder that compulsory voting exists in this country, which means good on you for watching this program, but this person gets to vote, as does this person, and this person. And you wonder why sometimes elections aren't the way we want them. Here's the latest.